For the last month and a half now, the Acolyte has been the internet's favorite chew toy. And it's not very hard to see why. Firstly, it is a very bad show. It has mediocre to straight up poor acting, a laborious story told haphazardly and with no real sense of pacing, and despite being set in the glory days of the Old Republic, it is visually dark, uninteresting, and boring, conveying none of the wonder or the magic one would expect from the Jedi at the absolute zenith of their power. But this alone does not explain the popularity of talking about the Acolyte. How, well, discussing it has become more popular and well received than the show itself, because merely it being a bad Star Wars show. Well, I mean, come on. In our dreaded current year, bad shows are as common as viral cat videos on YouTube. There is clearly something more driving the zealous reception, and that is the fact that the Acolyte feels like a final, decisive battle. Like the darkest night of winter before finally the sun begins to reclaim the darkness. Something more than simply another bad show. It feels like the culmination of the bad shows that Disney has been making up until this point. I refer, of course, to our currently ongoing culture wars, where the Acolyte was Disney's last, desperate, all-out gamble on diversity, as they really did go all in on this one with a 100% dedication to the cause. This show was loudly proclaimed to be the most diverse Star Wars project ever, and the gayest Star Wars has ever been. This is certainly true, at least so long as one uses the progressive definition of the word diverse, e.g., no white men. As the only white men in the show are a Jedi that kills himself when told to by the black female main character, and a Wookiee that dies off-screen. And that is such an excellent microcosmos representation of the show overall as well. As before the Acolyte came out, they made a big deal about finally the fans would get what they want, a Wookiee Jedi. And they grass his ass off-screen without so much as a fight scene. And this was, of course, just the beginning. The Acolyte was directed and created by a lesbian who hired her wife for roles. 100% diverse casting, so long as again we abide by the progressive definition of the word, even replicating the one and only African American approved hairstyle. The story itself focused on lesbian space witches bending, breaking, and generally desecrating Star Wars canon, and on the dark side of the Force, which is given an incredibly charitable interpretation as the main focus of the story, and in turn, of course, the Jedi are deconstructed, reducing them to space cops with dubious reasons for their actions and dark secret pasts, so as to have no real good guys, no heroes that can morally contend with the dark side, which the show is of course designed to advocate for. And finally, and most desperately of all, the reach for the old sex sells, with the blatant appeal to the female gaze, with several massively out-of-place shirtless scenes. And yet, crucially, despite Disney going all in on the bit, committing fully to the religion of wokeism, and doing absolutely everything in their power to appeal to this new and supposedly massive audience that HR has been telling them is just around the corner if only they would guzzle the Kool-Aid a little harder, there has been no reward. Only more stick, as the Acolyte is the single biggest bomb in Star Wars history, famously overtaking the Christmas special and securing its legacy as one of the worst shows ever produced. This was Disney going all in. This was them putting all their chips on the table, listening to the HR lady, listening to the diversity representatives, and going, okay, no more half measures, everything on diversity, and finally we will be able to replace our audience. As that has, of course, been Disney's actual intent now since, well, the Disney Wars series. They told us as much. Let the past die, kill it if you have to. They were talking about replacing the fans internally all the way back then. And the fact that this has now leaked fully on through to the mainstream media, where we have seen a cavalcade of articles saying Star Wars isn't the problem, the fans are the problem, only hammers it home yet further. That the problem was never Star Wars going as far left as humanly possible. The problem was those damned silly fans who wouldn't simply consume product and not question. And of course, this replacement of the fans was on the assumption that there would be a larger fan base out there. We have seen other articles throughout the Star Wars Disney era where pretty much every franchise has had at least one or two articles going, well, listen here, it's the fans who are the racists, the sexists, the bigots, etc. This has then all fed back into the feedback machine of HR, bringing it up to Disney and going, listen, everybody's on our side. We've just got to push a little bit harder, and finally we'll break through to the positive side of the incredibly huge numbers of diverse viewers. Now, I and many others have been saying for years that this audience doesn't actually exist, but perhaps that was, too much of an oversimplification, too direct a message, so allow me to expand upon it instead. There is an audience like that out there. The minority of people on the world, on the planet, are of course Star Wars fans. There are more people who either don't know or care about Star Wars out there than there are people who do, of course. The problem is, they don't care about Star Wars for a reason. And so even if you do manage to get them invested in Star Wars, they will at best be tourists, which is what the Acolyte so perfectly exemplifies. As the only positive coverage of the Acolyte has been around their new sexy Sith. Nobody's trying to defend the Acolyte's choreography, the Acolyte's acting, its characters or storylines. All of it surrounds this attractive Sith character. Now you and I, and everybody else with two neurons to rub together, will recognize this for what it is. Sex sells. If you're attracted to a character, then you are quite likely to view that character in the most beneficial and optimistic light possible. We have known this pretty much since the first human being painted tits on the wall of a cave. But the always political, safe, horny left is incapable of any level of introspection, and so they are completely unable to analyze why they suddenly like this Sith so very, very much. Instead, they will write articles going, Star Wars is finally growing up. It is giving us a truly nuanced look at the dark side of the Force. Nuanced look? Really? How? Are we talking about how he is a fallen Jedi, apparently? Are we talking about perhaps the outright seduction of the dark side of the Force in a universe where only light exists? The undeniable draw of the dark? Are we talking about the desire to find someone like himself, to find a pupil, to find purpose and meaning, and creating more who share his ideology? Is that what we're talking about? Honestly, I'm stretching hard here because I have a difficult time finding how this is a particularly nuanced character. But of course, I am being facetious. The reason why this is Star Wars growing up and this being a nuanced character is because he's hot. I've read a dozen articles now And it all is the exact same argument. He's sexy, I like him, therefore nuanced and deep. Oh well, look, it makes the dark side seductive and appealing. That's not really the point of the dark side. That isn't really nuanced, that isn't really complex. What you are describing here is a honey trap. What you are describing here is probably the single lowest level ploy in human history. What you are describing here is the hot, big-titted blonde woman winking at you and then going, "Hey, join my OnlyFans." This is not Star Wars growing up. This is not nuanced. This is the left's utter incapacity to engage with sexuality on a normal human level, convincing you that attraction equals depth and complexity. Again, the utter lack of introspection. Because let me put this into a bit more of a perspective here. Think of Palpatine and the unfathomably enormous and intricate spiderweb of lies, of truths, of half-truths, of manipulations, of plans, of schemes and plots and corruptions that he needed to all weave together over decades to plunge the galaxy into war and to turn the Republic into the Empire. All of that reduced to, he's got nipples. Or Darth Vader, the unbridled emotion of Vader, the rage, the anger, the thirst for vengeance eventually, and his redemption reduced to, his hair looks kinda good falling down his face that way. Or the unnatural, reality-breaking experiments of Darth Plagueis reduced to, he looks kinda good when wet. This is peak tourism. This is the audience that Disney has tried so hard to replace Star Wars fans with. And The Acolyte is the end result of it. The Acolyte is not a Star Wars show. It is not intended to please the Star Wars audience. It is intended to please Alyssa Mercante. It is intended to be the vision of Star Wars of somebody who has no real interest in Star Wars beyond its most superficial aesthetic. And despite pushing the skin suit of Star Wars to its absolute breaking point, and filling the show with everything the wider audience claims they have been clamoring for a decade now, the show still failed. And again, make no mistake, Disney is a company first and foremost. There are people within it that are activists. There are people within it that have pushed for the Acolyte, and there are loads of people who have furthered the idea that the diverse audience is out there. Indeed, I even believe that they themselves genuinely believed this. Because at the end of the day, our culture war has been a competition of the 2% over the 98%. We always believed we had the silent majority on our side. They always believed they had the silent majority on their side. And the Acolyte is the final proving ground of that debate. And we have demonstrated, without the shadow of a doubt, that our position was the stronger. Our arguments were better, and the majority are indeed on our side. That is what makes the Acolyte special. That is why the Acolyte will be worth remembering beyond its pathetic, paltry, in all due likelihood, single-season run. Because it will have been a turning point. Now, don't misunderstand me, this doesn't mean that we're going to get conservative wars immediately thereafter. The Acolyte was announced in planning and development 5 years plus ago, and it was created by an entire structure within Disney as far left as you could possibly go. Before Disney can even think about making a non-woke Star Wars property, they are going to need to find some non-woke people to write it. Even looking at it optimistically, we're probably a solid half-decade away from getting a non-progressive Star Wars show. But I can virtually guarantee that Disney is beginning to talk about it and planning it right now. So even though The Acolyte has been quite the show, you should all remind yourselves that it is always darkest before the dawn, and that The Acolyte is probably about as dark as it can possibly conceivably get. Do let me know what you think in the comment section down below, though. Maybe I'm being overly optimistic, but I don't think so. I am actually rather optimistic. I've been rather optimistic for quite some time now, and it really does feel as if the clouds are finally beginning to part. Until next time, I have been Arch. Thank you all very much for listening, and I do hope to see you all again soon. Have a good day.